Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Catherine and this is Raspberry Reads. So I have a new installment in my sort of 5-star series. I'll link some of the other videos I've done in the description box below for you, but today we're doing 5-star dystopian recommendations. So for those of you who have been watching my channel for a while, you know that dystopian fiction is one of my favorite genres. And if you're new, well, now you know. So yeah, I would say I read dystopian quite a lot, and it's probably one of my, if I had to like pick a genre, it would be up there with one of my top picks for a genre that I gravitate towards. Although I find them unsettling, there's just something about really just getting lost in the story that I find works quite well with dystopian fiction. But yeah, there are way too many for me to tell you about today, and some of these you may already be familiar with, but I thought I would just start with 5 of my highly recommended dystopian fiction works, and sort of explain my reasonings why I think you should read them if you haven't already. So let's get started. The first one is Ready Player One, and this is by Ernest Cline. The film came out 4 years ago, 5 years ago. What is time? Came out a while ago anyways. I actually really liked the film version, but the book is also great. I haven't read Ready Player Two because I've heard really mixed reviews about it, so I'm just sort of sticking with the classic. But yes, if you're not familiar with Ready Player One, it's obviously dystopian, and it's set in 2044, which horrifyingly is not that far away to our reality. And in this world, there's like severe climate change, climate damage. There are issues having to do with sort of like fuel availability and natural resource availability. There's lots of poverty, famine, disease, all of that. And the main character's name is Wade Watts, and he lives, I think, with his aunt in sort of this like refugee, like ramshackled cityscape that you can kind of see from the cover there, where they're all sort of stacked on top of each other, all of the kind of RVs. Amongst like chaos and ruin. And so Wade, like many of the people in his world, likes to escape reality using like virtual reality gaming. And they go to this world called the Oasis, and it's this virtual utopia. And in the Oasis, people can, using their avatars, can gain points, and not going into the whole premise too much, but the whole point is that Halliday, what's his full name? James Halliday was the creator of the Oasis, and he sort of left all these clues so that, after his death, that they're basically looking for the new person to control the Oasis and get all of Halliday's fortune. So that's sort of the incentive for playing the game, as it were. So although much of this book is set in an alternate reality, the thing that reminds me most about this book and how much I liked it was actually the reality side of the dystopian world, and why all these people felt the need to escape from their everyday life so much and just live in an alternate world. And why do I think that is relevant for today? Well, you can't help but think of everything that's going on in the world and how much we desperately try to kind of escape reality, thinking about like use of social media, use of AI, it's all increasing. And I think this book is in many ways an accurate dystopia for what could be coming down the line for us, without being too negative or trying to be too negative. And so what I always do in these 5-star videos is I pick 3 words that I think sort of encapsulate each book. So for Ready Player One, I thought that perseverance is a good theme that runs through this book. So Wade, or his avatar name is Percival, I think. So he's quite perseverant in trying to win the game, but also sort out some of the mess once you find out sort of what's going on. Loyalty, there's lots of themes of sort of friendship throughout this, mostly in the Avatar world, the Oasis world. So Wade Percival has two friends called H and Artemis, and there's lots of loyalty where they try and work together. And the last one was retro. So if you're a fan of the 80s like I am, and you haven't read this book, then it is fantastic. There's lots of references to 80s music, 80s culture, and yeah, after reading the book, if you haven't seen the film and you like 80s music, I would recommend watching the film as well because they've got lots of great songs. So yeah, Ready Player One, the first of the five-star dystopian picks from me. Have you read Ready Player One? If so, then let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Okay, up next we have Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. So she's a Canadian author, and that's one of the reasons why I picked this up in the first place, actually, not to be too biased. But so this takes place during and after a pandemic, and I think I read this maybe a year or so after our pandemic. And so I would say if you have sort of complicated feelings about the pandemic we went through, maybe don't go for this one yet. But otherwise, it is a really interesting premise in terms of how a pandemic starts. I think it's a flu. And yeah, you kind of go from there. So why I liked this is that it was quite ambitious. So I'm going to be honest and say that I really, really like this, and yet I can't remember exactly what happens in it. And I've spoken before about Emily St. John Mandel's writing, that I have a really like love-hate relationship with it, because there are moments where I'm like, oh, this is so brilliant, and then I find it a little bit confusing. And I think why I say this is ambitious is that I remember really enjoying it, and yet there are patches where I just can't remember exactly how the story went. It follows a sort of traveling symphony that plays music and also recites Shakespeare in this sort of post-pandemic landscape. And there's lots of, not like, what I want to say, like tribal warfare, but that's not the right word. But like there's lots of violence and sort of people ganging up on each other, I guess. And I should say that this is set in North America and initially is based in Toronto, and then they sort of travel down into the US. And the main character's name is Kirsten, although from what I can remember, there were some other characters. I think there was a male protagonist and his brother, and I found that storyline quite interesting. But again, I can't remember the details. But so yes, ambitious in the idea behind Station 11. And for the 3 words, I would say that it's eerie. I definitely think about this book a lot, mainly in the fact that we've been through a pandemic, and then this is a sort of like, oh, whoa, what could have happened in an alternate reality. I think that it's quite cultured. It's got fairly complex writing, and because it bases the plot on the traveling symphony and Shakespearean recitals, that's quite an interesting approach to a dystopian work. Normally dystopian is quite sci-fi, and this has a lot of like arts and humanities embedded in it. And then I would say it's atmospheric. I do remember reading like lots of excerpts about them traveling and setting up their tent, and just some of the descriptions of the chaos during the pandemic. So yeah, it's definitely atmospheric. So if you haven't read Station 11 already, then I do recommend it. And if you have read it, what are your thoughts? As always, I'm very keen to hear what you think down below. Okay, so next up, I don't have physical copies because I was reading these on the Libby app as ebooks. And so this is the Omnibus trilogy by Hugh, Howey. And the first one is called Wool, and the second one is called Shift. And I haven't even read the third one, which I'll pop it up on the screen. I'm about to start reading it. But I know even if I don't like the third one, I liked Wool and Shift so much that they would still be one of the best dystopian series out there for me. So this is basically a world where people end up living underground in these silos that are like, I don't know, 100 levels deep below the ground. And it's very sort of, I guess, kind of communist in its organization. Like everybody has a role and they have to kind of stick to their stations and classes, as it were. And I really liked Shift in particular because you then find out why this situation exists. And it's really kind of like nuanced and political. And so, yeah, when I eventually read the third one, I will obviously give you my thoughts on it. But in terms of why I like the Omnibus trilogy and Wool and Shift, is that they had great world building. You know, I've never come across something that is quite that creative. And I do think about the silos an awful lot. I think there's actually, pardon me, I think there's actually a series on HBO in the States on this, which I haven't seen, but yeah, really great idea, great world building. In terms of the three words, very unsettling, especially when you start finding out why things are happening and how people are being like coerced. It's mysterious because it's a slow burn. You don't necessarily find out what's going on very quickly. And then I think it's just really clever that, you know, you're presented with the first story as just sort of like factual, like here's a silo, people can't leave it, or, you know, they do for troubling reasons. And then in the second one, you really start to get to the crux of what's going on. And it's just, yeah, it's very cleverly written. So yes, I recommend reading the Omnibus trilogy by Hugh, Howey. And if you've read any of these three books, let me know your thoughts down below. Okie dokie. So the next book we have is The Giver by Lois Lowry. So this is a classic. It came out in the 90s. Yeah, it came out in 1993. So this was contemporary to me reading young adult. So that's why it's so influential for myself in particular. The Giver is the book that got me into reading dystopian as a genre. And yeah, I always recommend it to anybody, whether you're a young adult or not, because it's still so relevant to our time. So the things that I like in particular about The Giver is that it presents like a very sort of cultish feel, or cult dynamics. And it's very psychological in its tone. So it's basically about a boy named Jonas, sort of like a coming of age story. And all children who turn 12 get sort of assigned a role in the community. And he's then given some special training to become a giver. And that's sort of like the person who holds all memories of pain and like the positives and negatives of nice pain and pleasure. And the world is sort of just like devoid of any feeling. And as the sort of cover alludes, it's actually like it's all in black and white. And yeah, so it's very psychological, very sort of like kind of like a thought experiment in a way. I must admit, I would like to read this again. I've read it a few times, but it's been quite a while since I've read The Giver. But I just remember the ending being so like punchy and like gut dropping that it will forever be a top dystopian pick for me. Yeah, and so I think I kind of alluded to the 3 prompts already, but so yes, I would say like cultish would be a word, psychological, as I already mentioned, and coming of age, because this really is focused on a boy and his journey and the decisions he has to make in a pivotal point in his life. So once again, if you haven't read The Giver, would recommend, obviously, that's the point of this video. And if you have read The Giver, then let me know what you thought. And the last dystopian recommendation for you today, and it's one that I've actually just finished, is The New Wilderness by Diane Cook. And this book came out a few years ago. It took me quite a while to get through, and that's mainly because I was reading it as an ebook and I had to keep like returning it to the library. And so this is a really interesting dystopian in the sense that you get sort of, it alludes to what's going on in society in the cities. And if you think of sort of like the Hunger Games, where they've got different districts, the New Wilderness is similar in the sense that there are regions where there are like different purposes for the land. So you've got like the cities, there's like areas where it's just for resource gathering. And then there's the wilderness. And this wilderness has been sort of demarked for an experiment, a social experiment. It's set up to be an experiment about nature and whether or not nature can be left in its natural state with humans in it. So they try their best to not interfere and like collect up after themselves. But actually, it's more so about a social experiment. So there's a group of people who are the first sort of volunteers for this experiment in the New Wilderness, and they go and exist in a kind of self-sufficient, nomadic way. They're not supposed to make any settlements, and they're not supposed to leave any trace. And it's very much a slow conversation about humanity and social dynamics and like group dynamics. So like from an anthropological perspective, it's a fascinating book. Why I liked it is that it's very similar to if you want to watch like reality TV, like trash telly. So if you like things like, was it called like Alone, the one where people would just go out into the wilderness and try and survive, or anything where you've got like a group of people trying to coordinate themselves and define whether they want to have like a leader or democracy or whatnot. There's a lot of that in this book, and it was a bit long, and I wouldn't say it's a 5-star. I'd say it's more of a 4-star, but it's still worth mentioning here. But I really did enjoy the social side, the anthropological side of this book, as you try and understand why it is that these people have to be in the wilderness in the first place. So it's the fact that they're basically now refugees because the world has become pretty much uninhabitable. And then in terms of the 3 words, so I think atmospheric. There's definitely some really good descriptive writing for setting the scene in the wilderness. Raw, and then by that I mean the writing was really like punchy and honest. And there were some sentences where I was just like, ugh, okay, you didn't need to go into that much detail, but I appreciated it because it made it realistic. But then also subtle. So you go into this book sort of thinking it's going to be one thing, and then subtly you're actually given all these themes about, politics and social dynamics, as I've already mentioned. Group mentality, and it was just really interesting to read. And so for that reason, I wanted to recommend The New Wilderness to you. So, as always, if you've read The New Wilderness, let me know in the comments below. So with these 5 books, I've tried to include sort of different dystopias, I guess. So like with Ready Player One, we've got a dystopia, but then with an alternate reality. Station 11, we have kind of 2 timelines, the kind of during the pandemic and then the aftermath. Wool, we have a sort of, the Omnibus trilogy. In Wool, you are in the present tense of the dystopia, but in Shift, you go back in time to find out why this reality has come to be. And then The Giver is a mind-bending book because what is reality is basically The Giver. So you don't know what is the dystopia and what isn't. And then, yeah, with the New Wilderness, it's not set in the dystopia, but it is. So yeah, they're all quite different in that way. And that is why I enjoyed them. So I hope you have liked this video. I hope it's been useful for you. If you're not normally a reader of dystopia fiction, then I would recommend trying one of these out. But maybe not all in one go, because the thing with dystopian fiction is that it can be quite depressing, and you know, lots of people read as a form of escapism to escape the complicated situation or our complicated reality, right? And then if you're reading something that's equally horrific, that can get you down. So I would always encourage people with dystopian fiction to kind of mix it up with other lighthearted things so you don't get yourself too bogged down. But yeah, so that just leaves me to say that I hope you're all doing really well, and I will see you soon with a new video. Take care. Bye.